Great. All right, thanks everyone. And I did just want to say another huge thanks to Heather, Christina, Reggie, and Catherine for such an excellent panel that we just had on ways that we can decouple per publication charges from OA models. And thank you all for being so quick in this break and for heeding Heather's warning. I think we should have enough time for the reception later, so thank you for being very brief. Just a few housekeeping. So the drinks and the canapes will be in the mezzanine, so where we've been having our different breaks, and that will go on till 8 p.m. this evening. And the reception is generously supported by the Royal Society of Chemistry, and OASPA would like to thank them for their support once again of the conference, which is now slightly awkward for me when I tell you that I'm Sarah Bossart, head of open access at the Royal Society of Chemistry, which has absolutely nothing to do with why I am introing this panel today. I also happen to be on the organizing committee for the conference. So I am very pleased to be able to introduce our final speaker for this evening. It's our keynote plenary session. Maurice York is the Director of Library Initiatives for the Big Ten Academic Alliance, and Maurice is responsible for coordinating collective action at scale among the research libraries of the Alliance towards their commitment to realizing an independent, networked future. A key activity is a comprehensive strategy to strengthen an independent future for the 15 world-class research libraries of the Alliance by joining the separate collections into one collection, shared and fully networked across all physical and digital domains. Previously, Maurice was at the University of Michigan and at North Carolina State University. Maurice is here today to outline efforts to grow a sustainable diamond open access publishing network in the US and Canada, amongst other topics. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Maurice to the stage. Maurice?
Great, thank you so much. It's so wonderful to be here. It's a great honor. I've been in Europe for about 2 weeks now. I was mostly in France, and in France, I'm Maurice, and back in the United States, I'm Maurice. So I can change wherever I go. It's quite wonderful. So it's so wonderful to be here with you this evening. Just so much gratitude to the organizers of the conference, to the OASPA staff, to Claire, to Bernie especially. This is really a wonderful opportunity to be here. So I am going to speak to you this evening about the open knowledge paradigm. I'm going to say up front as I move through this, I'm going to be working at a very high level. So any of the topics I touch on here have entire fields and disciplines behind them. They go incredibly deep, so I'm just going to skate over the surface. So I will welcome your indulgence as we move together through this story. So just to start off with a little bit of context about the Big Ten Academic Alliance, I realized I should update my bio because as of a month ago, we are now 19 research universities. We expanded to the coast to coast across the United States. In those 19 research universities, there's over $17 billion in funded research annually, over 100,000 publications. That's especially what we're going to focus on, the research and the publications. But a little bit more about who we are, over 800,000 enrolled students across all our universities, 1.2 million people from coast to coast. Over 150 million holdings in our libraries, both physical and digital, and combined spending each year of over $850 million. The vision for the Big Ten Library is looking at this from a global perspective. At one point, someone asked me, our initiative is the big collection, to combine the libraries across all of our universities into one collection, shared and fully networked. That's a collection of resources for sure. It's a collection of people. It's also a collection of expertise, of technology, of infrastructure. So someone asked me, how big is the big collection? Well, when we look at it globally, it will be the third largest library collection in the world, just behind the Library of Congress and the British Library. We are working at scale. What is most important for us this evening is that these libraries are also, these universities account for over 15% of US research output. And Catherine Mitchell is here from CDL. Of course, we now share a member in the University of California, Los Angeles at UCLA. Combined, the Big Ten Academic Alliance and the UC system account for over 25% of US research output. So when I say I'm moving up to speak at a high level, we are really at this level of scale, working in a global context. So let's return to our topic here, open knowledge, right? And particularly, we're going to dive into open publishing. This is our context here. As we look toward the future of open publishing and we ask ourselves where we are, where do we go? How is it that we navigate, right? What do we do now? What is it that we're called to do? What's our viewpoint? Right? What stand do we take? What will our actions be as we move forward? So here I want to take as our context the North Star for the Big Ten Academic Alliance libraries, because this is quite significant, right? Our open publishing efforts. It's not just about what we hold, it's about what we produce. And when we move into that level, we are at a global level of partnerships and alliances. And this is our North Star, right? In order to advance a just, trustworthy, scalable, and sustainable open knowledge ecosystem, to make open, more equitable knowledge our lead purpose. This guides everything we do, everything, right? It is the first thought that we have when we look at every sphere of action. So particularly when we look into the sphere of open publishing, what I'd like to propose to you is that we take this as an entry point into perceiving the path to open knowledge. Let's follow it a little ways. And we should ask ourselves as we begin, right? What is it that leads? Is it efficiency? Is it working a little better, saving a little more money, working a little more effective? That metric, saving money, it stands at the origin of so many library consortia in the US. It was the origin of the Big Ten Academic Alliance libraries. We have a licensing portfolio, just like about every other library consortia in the US. We were asked one question at the end of the year: how much money have you saved us? That was our metric, right? So we should also pause and ask ourselves, what's the cost of that efficiency, right? What does it leave behind? Having been at many negotiating tables, I could propose to you that the first thing that gets left behind are principles, ideals, right? Things like equity, things like openness, things like justice. We bring all those to the table and we have high ideals and we say, we would like all of these things, we would like author rights, we would like all of these things combined into one glorious package to provide our researchers. And we get told, well, no problem, here's the price. And we say, oh, well, let's back that off a little bit. Right? We'll cut it a little bit back. The North Star, however, it lifts our eyes, right? It lifts our vision. It elevates our task. So as we stand here this evening, as we sit here this evening, right? The open knowledge paradigm shift has been in progress for over 20 years. This is a common phrase now, referred to as a paradigm shift in open knowledge. What is it that we're looking at? What is it that we're talking about? It turns out 2 decades of this paradigm shift. And what has it gotten us? Actually, a lot, right? More than half of the world's research is now published open. We hit that metric in 2022. 3.3 million articles a year, right? That's science and engineering articles. The number fluctuates, right, depending on who you ask. But 8.8 million scientists globally, publishing 3.3 million articles a year, and both of those are just growing exponentially. The next 50% of open, the next 50% is the hard part. The easy part took 20 years. What happens in that second half. Can we afford that kind of time? Let's follow the North Star a little further. It suggests a path. And how do we understand that paradigm shift? What does it mean? A paradigm shift in knowledge itself. In knowledge itself. Something kind of remarkable happens when we ask ourselves about paradigm shifts. Well, what are they? What's the nature of a paradigm shift? They do occur regularly in many fields of knowledge. We can see them all around us. A definition: a major change in the worldview, concepts, and practices of how something works or how it's accomplished. In other words, the old laws don't apply anymore. They don't matter. Only the new laws are operable. So how are we going to study them, right? Well, if we're going to understand the open knowledge paradigm, can we look around us and understand a little bit about paradigms themselves? One way to do this is futurism, right? We can try to predict what will happen, what the new laws will be. If the old laws don't apply anymore, we just leave them behind, right? Skip ahead a little bit, right? Could call it prophecy, right? A little prediction, a little foretelling, perhaps. If we're going to look at other fields of knowledge, let's see how that works out. Here was one prediction. When the Paris exhibition closes, electric light will close with it and no more be heard of. This was the Paris exhibition of 1879. Erasmus Wilson said this in 1878. Who was Erasmus? He was an Oxford University professor. Perhaps he should know. 1893, the first ship, the ship Columbia, was outfitted with electric light from stem to stern. And now look around us. Would we be sitting in this basement together, talking? Not so much for Erasmus. Next, heavier than air flying machines are impossible. Lord Kelvin, 1895. Lord Kelvin, president of the British Royal Society. What happened in 1903? Heavier than air flying machine took off from Kitty Hawk, and we could fly. Lord Kelvin's prediction didn't last too long. Let's look at another one. Nuclear-powered vacuum cleaners will probably be a reality in 10 years. 10 years. Alex Lute, 1955. Alex Lute, president of Lute Corp, a vacuum manufacturer. I don't have a vacuum from Lute Corp. I don't know if any of you do. Perhaps did not lead his company in the best direction. We'll take one more. I think there's a world market for maybe 5 computers. Thomas Watson. Anybody? Thomas Watson. Chairman of IBM. 1943. So we can see that trying to prophesy, trying to foretell, to engage in this futurism is a little bit fruitless, right? Sometimes it works, many times it does not. It may not carry us to where the future ultimately lies. So let's go back to paradigm shifts. How do we study them? How do we do this? Here I turn to Ralph Waldo Emerson, American writer of the 19th century, transcendentalist. The laws of nature are the laws of mind. To understand the mind, we are trying to understand the paradigm shift in knowledge, study nature. So rather than engaging in this futurism and prophecy, let's look to the observable facts. What can we study in the realm of examples of paradigm shifts? Let's look first at the behavior of light. Right. Now, it turns out that in the 17th century, there was quite a debate about the nature of light. Is it a wave? Isaac Newton took up that position. Or is it a particle? Robert Hooke took up that position. For about 3 centuries, this disagreement kind of proceeded. You could actually do experiments and see that it both worked out, whichever way you did it, until the early 20th century, when Albert Einstein stepped into quantum theory and said that light can behave as photon or wave, depending on the experiment you run. Now, it wasn't only Albert Einstein. There are many scientists working on quantum theory, of course. Einstein, in a certain way, introduced us to quantum theory. So, in fact, Einstein said, light is both. This is the origin of what we call now the wave-particle duality. It also led to another very important understanding that light, the visible light we see, is part of an electromagnetic spectrum, and that the visible light we see is only a very narrow slice of that. When we look at light, it reflects. We can see ourselves in mirrors. We can see light bouncing off. It's how we see these beautiful tables. When we're in other parts of the spectrum, light moves through objects, right? We're in radio waves, microwaves, infrared spectrum, so forth. It will pass through those physical objects where visible light bounces off, a dual nature of light. This becomes very important. As long as we're talking about Einstein, another paradigm shift, radical paradigm shift in science, mechanical physics, I'll call it, to quantum physics. Now, Einstein, as I mentioned, introduced quantum physics, but he became its greatest opponent. He said there was no way that the world could be this chaotic. No way it could be this creative, right? God doesn't play dice, was Albert Einstein's position. There has to be a cosmic constant, right? Quantum physics said there is no constant. Everything is continually in play. You don't know the variables. You don't know how they interact. Einstein said impossible. There has to be a cosmic constant that continually pulls back, right? Continually grounds us, brings science, brings the cosmos back to reason. Einstein, becoming one of the greatest, having discovered quantum physics, but becoming its greatest opponent, argued against it his entire life. Right? He thought they were making great progress, but they were really missing something. After Einstein died, long after he died, the experiments started to come forward that proved the theories of quantum physics, that proved this is actually the way that the universe operates, a complete paradigm shift. Further models of the universe. Let's go to another paradigm shift in science. We'll go all the way back. It's a model that prevailed from 150 before the Common Era all the way up to the 17th century. The Ptolemaic cosmos, the Earth-centric cosmos. The Earth is fixed, the planets rotate around the Earth, and so does the sun. Through the 17th century, it was around long enough. It had glorious illustrations of the Ptolemaic worldview. They're beautiful. Until Copernicus sat down and looked at it and said, there's a problem with what Ptolemy was doing. If you do the math, it doesn't quite work out, you know? So he proposed the heliocentric model, which actually didn't come into common parlance until a couple centuries after Copernicus died, right? As Galileo began to prove out the math, do the experiments. In the heliocentric model, the planets revolve and rotate. Now we bring motion into the cosmos. Finally, in 1865, now that Copernican cosmos, you can see up there all the way to the 20th century. As we're edging toward the 20th century, 1865, an astronomer named Herschel, looking at the sky, created his catalog of galaxies. Notice that the stars were clustering in very tight groups. And you could actually observe them and map them across the sky. That was Herschel's catalog. This is still a 2D sky, right? No matter where you look at the sky from the Earth, it's always 2 dimensions. So Herschel plotted them out on a 2-dimensional sky. What are these galaxies, right? At least we can begin to describe them. Something remarkable happened at the beginning of the 20th century. Sloan Digital Sky Survey began to look at the heavens and start to be able to map it out into three-dimensional space, observing redshift light, right? Being able to tell that the galaxies are actually in motion, that they create elaborate structures. This fly-through, these aren't stars, right? Oh, because of our light in our room, you probably can't see it well. These are galaxies. Over 400,000 galaxies in this visualization, all plotted down with the data from the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. So we come to, why am I telling you this long story about galactic models? It's fair. The Sloan Digital Sky Survey was a wild idea in the 90s. When they went to the National Science Foundation for a grant, they proposed another wild idea to NSF, that they would make all of their data public. This was not done. It was not common. They actually had to convince NSF that this would be a productive thing to do for public knowledge. Now, it's how we do everything, right? To receive funding from a government and not publish your data publicly, I mean, I think we actually have movements against that now, right? Incredible. So mapping the cosmos of galaxies in 3D, this was the map of the universe that came from SDSS, right? Moving as so picture ourselves out here on the right. As we look further and further into the universe, we look further and further back in time because of the time light takes to reach us. Should be a constant, right? I think Einstein said something about that, cosmic constants. Until when we reach the furthest edges, we should be out at the very origins of the universe with the Big Bang. That was 2008 that map was created. In only the space of 2008 to 2024, an entirely new map of the universe. A paradigm shift, right? In the space of, was that 16 years? Our first paradigm shift took hundreds of years. So this map of nothing, right? This is what has developed in the last 16 years. The notion that the universe is actually constructed of superclusters and voids. The first notion of voids was vast reaches of space, right? Completely empty. That the galaxies actually spread out in webs across the cosmos, right? The original concept was, well, the Big Bang should have moved everything at the same speed. Throughout the universe should be expanding, matters distributed evenly. It turns out it's not, right? And it turns out the universe is mostly constructed of voids. And that, in fact, a void is not actually a void. A vacuum isn't actually a vacuum. They're filled with energy. We just can't quite detect it yet. Our instruments aren't fine enough. Our sight isn't deep enough. Even the black hole now. Scientists actually suspect that energy does leave a black hole. That was common wisdom. Or since they were discovered, nothing gets away from a black hole, right? We all know that. Nothing gets away from a black hole. It turns out something might. What is that? So this entirely new map of the universe is the voids, the map of nothing, right? The voids are the fundamental structures of the universe, and in fact, the cosmic constant is no longer constant. We don't know how fast it goes, right? It actually changes speed as it encounters voids of different masses and different sizes. There have been galactic structures discovered that are billions, tens of billions of light years across. Einstein's theory of the universe said nothing could be over 1.2 billion light years across. It's impossible, right? Now we have things that are tens and tens of billions of light years across. All of this discovery based on the open data. This all comes from Sloan. Here is the sphere of public knowledge. Here is the sphere of publishing, of open data, of open knowledge. So here I'm going to return us to our North Star. And actually, if you observed the slope of the globe there, that was the northern hemisphere of the sky. Over on the edge, you could still see Polaris, our North Star, our celestial north. So let's return to our North Star. In order to advance a just, trustworthy, scalable, and sustainable open knowledge ecosystem, make open, more equitable scholarship our lead purpose. How do we follow that North Star? So we've looked at a couple of paradigm shifts. Right? We talked about how the old laws no longer apply. The new laws are what is operable. So does that necessarily mean that a paradigm shift negates what came before? That the understanding of the previous laws doesn't matter anymore, right? Was it wasted time? Here I'll return to Emerson. Provides us another clue. Every wall becomes a door. These are actually, we could visualize them more like rooms that we're passing through, right? One room where we discover a whole series of laws, and then we get to open a door in what seemed like a law and pass to a new room, and another room beyond it. We have to move through those rooms to achieve what's further on. It's a stepwise process we walk through together. So let's look at the laws of open knowledge, if you will allow me, the laws of open knowledge, right? We'll look at a channel, a law that applies, and an inequity. Because one thing about the science of the cosmos, what Sloan did, you notice I started with individuals the further back in time I went. That's not how science is conducted anymore, right? You all know this. You see the papers with 20, 40, 60, 100 authors. Science is done together. It's done in community. These paradigm shifts are achieved in community. So when we look at open knowledge, and we especially observe these realms where, what are those realms where it takes collective action, where it takes all of us working together, right? Where the problems are so large that not only can none of us individually tackle them, our institutions can't tackle them, our organizations can't tackle them, our companies can't tackle them, we actually have to work together. This partnership where we all come together and work to achieve that paradigm shift. We're not going to predict it. We're going to move together toward it. So let's look at what we have today. The subscription model, right? I mentioned that I'm going to ask you to come along with me as I kind of condense things down a little bit. Okay. Subscription model, a law that operates here, the publisher pays. Publisher pays for knowledge. An inequity that emerges here is a great inequity in public knowledge. Knowledge becomes privatized. And actually, we all know this now, right? Why are we moving toward open access? Because of those inequities that get created. So we have the gold model, right? Let's try that. Author pays. We'll do it a little differently. There's a tremendous inequity here as well, though, an inequity in access to resources. We've been hearing about some of the complex dimensions of this today, right? But if we boiled it down to this one facet, inequity in access to resources, who gets heard? Do you have money? Who has money? Right? Who has access to those avenues, right? To those resources to be able to be heard? So let's try another route, right? Where the author doesn't pay. Green actually emerged maybe a little before gold, a little bit alongside of it. The library pays. I mean, many people pay, but the library pays, right? Who's going to host that infrastructure to provide those platforms? There's another inequity here that emerges, an inequity in who is heard and what is remembered. Because what gets contributed to these wonderful repositories that libraries are running? Well, by the way, I come out of a long background in IT systems and libraries, information technology. I ran these systems for a long time. I kind of watched what was happening, what came into them, how many data sets, how many articles, right? We kind of run around. It was like, oh, if you could please contribute, if you could just upload your article, it'd be great. We'll hang on to it for you. The preservation of that knowledge, I could have a conversation with anybody who's in digital preservation who wants to know how that actually works out. We're not quite sure yet, right? A great inequity in who is heard and what is remembered. And then Diamond. This seems very promising. The community pays. We all pay together. The author doesn't pay, the publisher doesn't pay, we pay, right? But the inequity here in inclusion, in reputation, in scale and venue, right? The portion of articles published that go through the Diamond route is so vanishingly small against the vast number, that 3.3 million articles a year that are published. So if we look at these separately, we're looking at something of a fractured landscape. How do we proceed? So in particular, when the public looks at this, if we look at it through the lens of public knowledge, and particularly take that slice of inequity, these are very valid questions, right? I don't know how to answer them. Who gets to see what? On what terms? What gets saved? Who decides? Why? Who decides what people 50 years from now get to remember? If someone asked me that question, I would be so embarrassed. I don't want to answer that. Who's heard, right? What gets remembered? Who gets to speak? These are all valid questions that the public will ask. Are we producing knowledge? What are we creating, right? What are we studying? Have we given it as a gift to human knowledge and to the public, as the Sloan Digital Sky Survey did? By the way, when these paradigm shifts occur, and the wonderful news is that we can study them, right? We can study their characteristics, we can study their laws, we can learn how they work. What has happened in those paradigm shifts of science that I was describing to you is continually a deeper and deeper expertise is needed, right? Does it make the volunteers irrelevant? Does it make the public irrelevant? In fact, it doesn't. As Sloan posted all of those wonderful data sets, something called Galaxy Zoo was started in the UK, citizen science. There was actually so much data. There were not enough astronomers to process it all. So they opened it up to the public. And the public were actually going in and helping classify all of the galaxies. There were far too many. It had to be crowdsourced. It had to be all of us together. So let's return to these questions, right? What happens when we're looking at the open future? I'm going to propose to you that a quantum leap is needed here, a new way of working. I'll give you a hypothesis that the path forward is an investment in all of the pathways together. It's a combination of all of the laws. That means that we can no longer stand here and choose which path seems our favorite, right? Which one do we think is going to work? Which one do we think is going to win? I will tell you, the business models for the open future have not been created yet. If they haven't been created yet, we can't pick from the ones that we see and decide which one will ultimately be the one that sits there. We don't know what it looks like. I will also propose to you along that pathway that the colors of OA dissolve. That what we will be looking at are new business models, new metrics, new terms, new things that we can't sit here today and conceive of. So as we push forward into that future, our new question, we're pretty good at measuring cost in business process. We've all been doing it a long time. And that question, how much money did you save me this year? I'm really good at that question, right? But how might we approach measuring and quantifying our values and principles? Cost in business process, the older models, subscription models, of course, right? Actually, more recently, transformative agreements. Very constructive, they've achieved so much, but they really do work with the business models. They're incredibly powerful in that sphere. but that's where they work. Values and principles, where we move to open publishing. What is open publishing? Right? And these are, I'll give you a few of the principles that we started working with at the BTA libraries. Establishing a fair cost model and simplifying the publishing relationship. Here we mean research leads, no fees, no caps, no hassle. Publishers and libraries are an aid to research, they're partners. They're not a hurdle or a check. Radically reducing administrative process. What do scientists do? What do they get paid to do? What do they love to do? Research. They are not paid to manage this process. It's not their job, and it's terribly confusing. When I'm looking at those colors of OA, I'm not even sure anymore if I'm in colors or precious metals or rocks. I don't know what's going on, right? Much less to try to explain it to the poor researcher who just wants to maybe work on models of the cosmos. Increase publishing opportunities and increase OA publications within our membership. Quality of research leads, all venues, all titles are open pathways. The research leads, the research selects, the author selects, right? Rapidly expanding the field of opportunities for everyone. And finally, removing barriers for our authors and institutions. Every one of those models has thrown up barriers all over the place. Where it seems like it opened a pathway here, it erected 10 barriers over here. Take down the barriers, equitable access to resources and opportunities, every level of researcher, any stage of career, any venue, every title. And finally, advancing ownership and rights that expedite knowledge sharing and advance research. We place research and the author at the center. We follow our values, we follow our principles. That's the open future, that's the pathway. I don't know what it looks like, but I do have a proposal for what we might do to move there. We are a mission-led community, and when I say community, I mean all of us, right? Academic institutions, research institutions, publishers, organizations, open infrastructures, we're all a community. What we can do when we're principles and values-based is take up ideals, advance ideals. How do we measure progress on equity, openness, justice, public good, a raft of other ideals that we don't get to take up when we're just cutting cost and being more efficient? Saving money is just one metric. It's not that we stop saving money. That's really important, actually, right? But it's one thing among many. It's no longer the lead. It's no longer the North Star. We have a new North Star. And I'll make another proposal here that only all of us know enough. That actually all of those different models of open access, it's not a blanket coverage for the whole globe, as you know, right? Every region has different models that it follows. When we're in South and Central America, actually the repositories are the route to scholarly publishing. They're incredibly important. The Diamond Open Access movement spans the globe. It's very powerful. Commercial publishing is very powerful. There are actually numerous different alternative modes of working. Only all of us together know enough to create this future, to move toward it. So I'll leave you with this thought. Never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. It was Margaret Mead. This is a small group of citizens. We're all sitting together in the same room. We can do that. One last thought. This really struck me. This was Adam Dare at the Max Planck Institute, a diagram he created. It shows the progress of open knowledge since 2013, of open publishing, excuse me. The gray along the bottom is closed knowledge. And we got stripes of colors above. Oh, I don't think we should use colors anymore. So if we look at it this way, in 2013, 60% of knowledge was closed, published closed. 40% was open. An incredible reversal of that number, it seems, in 2022, right? 60% of knowledge is published open, but actually what's happened is that amount of closed knowledge has stayed relatively constant. So I would give you this encouragement. as we fight for that open future, do not forget the scholarship of the past. Incredible inequities were created in that body of knowledge. We know that because we're fighting to change that for the future. But that remains the same. Right? Don't forget, we can go back and open that. We can change what exists. So as we push forward in both of these spheres, let's do so together. Let's explore what that pathway is to achieve that paradigm shift toward the open knowledge future. Thank you so much. And I think we do have a few minutes for questions if anybody has something on their mind. Besides dinner and food and all of those wonderful things. Yes.
Thanks. Thanks, Robert Carney from Coalition S. That was great fun. Really, really enjoyable. Even if I did get lost in all the space animation stuff. Just one thing, if I may have misunderstood, of course, you talked about your North Star and something about being sustainable, and then you said we all need to work together. Can we have a sustainable model where such large profits are being made by some commercial publishers?
That was a wonderful question, right? And I think it's actually the key question that changes the conversation when we come to the negotiating table. So there are some, how do you negotiate, right? Books well known, right? When you come to the table, each person is fighting for what they'll most benefit them, the publisher for what will most benefit the company, the university for what will most benefit their bottom line, or the researchers, right? We're in a competition. When we come to the table and actually say we're in this together, we're seeking each other's sustainability, it fundamentally changes the conversation. It's a completely different viewpoint. And it does tangibly manifest in clauses, in terms, in language, in the way things are constructed. But until we're sharing that language, until we know that we're having a different conversation together, that's not possible, right? So if we come in and say, actually what's leading here are the principles and the ideals. Here's what we're trying to achieve. We're having it, and it actually takes a lot of work to say we're having a different conversation because we've been having that other one for so long. But I will tell you from success that it can be changed. And it manifests tangibly in contracts. All of this comes down to contracts in the end, right? But it can be very frustrating if we still think we're having the old conversation instead of the new conversation. And how to change that conversation is not well explored, right? I fail at it time and time again, right? It's really hard. But I think this is one of the things that we can do together is say, how do we form that new conversation? How do we form that new understanding? Because we're in the midst of the paradigm shift, right? The old laws actually still work. They still operate. And we can get drawn back into them very easily, unless we all have a mutual agreement at that table that we're working toward a new paradigm and we're trying to set a new stage, right? And so I absolutely think it's possible, yes.
Hi, Heather Staines from Delta Think. Loved it, and not just because I'm super duper space nerd, but like beyond that, I'm always saying that the models we're going to be using are not invented yet. So I love that. When we talk about a paradigm shift, and you and I have had conversations about this before, you know, what you guys are doing in Big Ten Academic Alliance around shared catalog and roles that cross institutions, I think that's a way to think about things differently. And so some of maybe the reason why we can't think about how these new collaborations are going to go forward is we're not yet kind of looking it out of the corner of our eye and kind of waiting for it to emerge. So for those folks who are not familiar with what VTAA is doing kind of around the sides, not just content, I think that might be a way to understand how this can be nudged out and kind of get bigger and broader and gain steam, if you don't mind elaborating a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. I could give a quick thumbnail sketch. So here's another important thing about changing the laws, is that all of the infrastructures that we've built tend to operate according to the old laws. It's because we asked them to. So I'll get into something just really straightforward and simple in the world of libraries, interlibrary loan, right? We're exchanging books between libraries. I own these books, you own those books, we'll trade with each other, we'll build huge elaborate networks in which all we're doing is trading physical materials between each other. It's all built on a paradigm of individual institutions that own an individual set of resources and agree that they're going to let them flow back and forth. But it turns out it's only a small fraction of what they actually own, right? The researchers, the students, can't see everything. It's actually hidden. And what we don't actually know or actually tell anybody is that every library has the right to say, nope, I don't want to. You're going to have to check down the block because I'm not going to share that. The paradigm completely shifts. So let's take the 19 research libraries of the Big Ten Academic Alliance. When we say we're no longer individual owners of our own pots of resources, we're joint stewards of a united set of resources. It asks us to change our point of view. It asks us to change what we're doing. And actually, all those systems that everybody was building, that vendors were selling, that we tried to build ourselves in open source, they were all based on the previous paradigm. So this is where I mentioned I come out of IT and systems. The systems we need don't exist either, right? All we have is a kit of parts in front of us, right? They're really hard to fit together. They don't quite mesh with each other. They don't want to because we asked them to be something else. So what's the future of resource sharing, right? Again, just like open publishing, I can't stand here and tell you, but I can tell you that the laws are fundamentally changing because there are massive conversations among brilliant, very smart, very motivated people, organizations, all trying to work together for what are collective collections, right? What does it mean to look at resources jointly owned and distributed across massive geographic regions? So it's not just the Big Ten Academic Alliance that needs it. Actually, we're kind of joining the conversation a little bit late. It's kind of cool to join conversations late, right? Because you can see all the mistakes everybody made, or you can learn, right? All the successes everybody had, because that's actually what we want to share. When we feel successful, when we're joining together and saying, what did you do? What did you learn, right? Oh, this is maybe the path. That's how we forge new laws. And we actually have to remember to go back and ask the system builders and the system makers and the system integrators to do different this time, right? We're not just tinkering with the old laws, we're asking for something entirely new. And that North Star, that's how that leads into every domain that we have, because the sharing of resources is fundamentally inequitable as well. I don't know that, right? But the rules we've created, the rules we've embedded in systems, were all written according to the old paradigms and the old laws. They left out so many people. They left out so much knowledge. There was so much that wasn't even included in what we collect or what we know or what we allow the future to remember. So that's really is what we're working on in the BTA libraries. And it's not that we discovered it or that we're doing anything unique. All we're doing is joining a conversation, right? And saying, we're stepping in as well. We would love to be here as well. We would love to join in and partner together to figure out the pathway into that future. Okay?
I'm so sorry. Sorry.
Thank you.